Hello again, readers. So in my last video we talked about Star of Wonder, which is the first book in the Incense Road trilogy, and it's about Misha, who is studying to be part of the secret sect of Magi. But now I want to tell you about book 2 of the Incense Road, which is Star of Night. Now the main character in Star of Night is not actually one of the wise men, though he wishes he were. Riza is actually a soldier, a general, sent with some of his troops in the journey across the desert to protect the traveling Magi and the caravan of traders that are traveling with them. But they're not just following a star, this group. Do you remember that magical object that I told you about? Did you guess what it was? It's actually the bronze serpent on a pole that Moses lifted up in the wilderness to heal the people after God punished them for their complaining in the wilderness. Now you might think that was the end of that snake on a pole, but actually it's mentioned one more time in the Old Testament in the book of 2 Kings, where God tells the king Hezekiah to destroy it after the people began to worship it, burn incense to it, presumably because of its healing powers. And it's also in that passage given a name, which is interesting. It's called, just briefly, the Nehushtan. So, you know me, I can't pass up an opportunity to explore something like that, and I got to wondering what would happen if King Hezekiah hadn't actually destroyed it, because the text just tells us that he broke it into pieces. So I got to wondering what would happen if it was still around at the time of Christ. And, well, you'll have to read more about that in Star of Night. But I promised to make you a little bit smarter in this video, and so that's what I'm going to do. I have another interesting story to tell you. That bronze snake on a pole, a lot of people associate the symbol for the medical profession, what we've come to associate with the medical profession, with that story and with the bronze snake on a pole. And it probably, the symbol that you kind of think of when you think of that is this symbol. So if you've ever looked closely at it and thought about that story in the Old Testament, you might have wondered, why the two snakes and what's with the wings? It doesn't seem to fit quite with the story. Well, it's interesting. So this is a caduceus. This is actually the staff of Hermes, who was the winged messenger of the gods, the Greek gods. Now, later, Hermes became associated with the Roman god Mercury. They were kind of interchangeable, and Mercury was the patron god of trade and commerce, and so that's actually where we get our terms for mercantile, merchant, and even market, was from the Roman god Mercury. But that staff of Hermes, that caduceus, was used for different things over the years, and in the 1800s it was used as an imprint, as a logo for a publisher who was publishing medical books, among other things. And then in 1902, the U.S. Army Medical Corps began flying this symbol above their ship to indicate to enemies that they were not involved in combat, that they shouldn't be attacked because they were a medical corps. So slowly, this became associated with the medical profession itself, which really was just a misunderstanding because people were believing that this symbol of Hermes was actually another symbol. They were thinking that it was this symbol, which is actually the rod of Asclepius. So Asclepius was a Greek god of healing. You can see the similarities and you can see why people got confused. So with this symbol flying above the Army Medical Corps, people began to associate this symbol with the medical profession, but it was really all just a misunderstanding based on their thinking that it was actually this symbol, the rod of Asclepius. So now, these days, most medical professions that use the symbol, they know the difference. And so if you look closely, you'll see that what they're actually using is the rod of Asclepius in their symbol. The American Medical Association and other organizations like that use that rod. But a lot of times you will still see this symbol, and it's usually with businesses that are commercial enterprises related to the medical profession that are using the staff of Hermes, the caduceus. And you might say that's because it fits in better with their trade and commerce sort of endeavors, but I kind of suspect it's because most people don't know any better and they just associate this with the medical profession as a whole and in general. But now you know better and you're a little smarter. So the real question for me is, where did this symbol come from? Where did the rod of Asclepius, the Greek god who existed or was created and developed hundreds of years after the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, where did this come from? And the answer is that many scholars believe that it did come directly from the Nehushtan, the symbol, the bronze serpent that existed for several hundred years before the Greeks and hundreds of years before the birth of Christ. So, you're a little smarter. And you know a little bit about what Star of Night is about because this is the object that my characters are questing for. So Riza the mage, or the aspiring mage, and Riza the general are traveling across the desert on this epic quest, and there's more to come. So be sure to watch the next video because I'm going to tell you about Royal Beauty. Now, Royal Beauty, because what is any great story? How can it be complete without a beauty to confuse these two guys and come along with them in their quest and just generally cause some trouble? Hey, me again, back with a question for you to answer in the comments below this video. So, my question for you, obviously my characters in these 3 novellas in the Incense Road are on a quest. I told you they're following the Nehushtan, chasing after that, but they're also following a star, and you know what they're going to find at the end of that star. So, my question for you is, if you could bring any gift to Jesus, no limitations, whatever your imagination can come up with, if you could bring any gift physically to Jesus there in Bethlehem, what would you bring? So answer that in the comments below, and I look forward to reading your answers.